Welcome to Beyond the Bloom, a K-State Research and Extension Douglas County, Kansas podcast. Each month we'll have a conversation about the role plants play in our world. Yes, we will talk about food and flower gardening, but we'll also talk about plant care, plant recommendations, and plant biology. Everything from peonies to prairies, succulents to squash.
Because when you want to beautify your space, support the local ecosystem, or grow your own fresh herbs and veggies, your local extension office is here to help. Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Bloom. This is Sharon Ashworth, Douglas County Horticulture and Natural Resources Agent. And I'm here today with one of our volunteer master gardeners, Steve Wood, who's going to talk about taking care of your lawn because fall is coming. Now is the best time of year to give your turfgrass some TLC. You have the month of September, maybe into October, to get things done. So we're going to talk about how to do that so that your turfgrass remains healthy all year long. So I'd like to introduce Steve Wood. As I said, he's a Douglas County Extension Master Gardener who is passionate about his landscape and keeping his turfgrass healthy and nice looking. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, it's great being here.
Now, I understand we've had a conversation before that you made a recent trip to Ireland, and that must have given you a look at some enviable lawns.
Ireland was fantastic. The people are beautiful. I actually went over there, Sharon, to find out the Irish myth is the reason why the grass is so green is because they spill a lot of Guinness and Jameson on the grass.
Aha.
And I found out that is not true. They don't spill any of their Guinness. They drink it all.
Okay, that's great. Because I was going to say, I'm not sure we could have enough Guinness to keep our lawns good and green over here.
Well, they have the ideal weather over there with the climate being around 70 degrees. If the moisture's right, the flowers are beautiful, the grass is green. It's really a beautiful country.
Yeah, and that moisture is key. So we have these beautiful, beautiful lush green lawns in places that get all that rainfall and moisture. So that makes it a little more difficult to do that, mimic that in Kansas.
True. You don't have all the ups and downs in Ireland in the temperature as we do in Kansas versus Ireland.
Mm-hmm. But I understand you do, for Kansas, have an enviable lawn, according to your neighbors. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your lawn and your most important management tips?
Well, when I first moved into my new house, which is about 4 years ago, I inherited a beautiful yard. In fact, it was a yard bigger than what I thought I was going to get. But I've always loved to have a beautiful yard and taking care of the yard. So one of the first things that I did, Sharon, was I wanted to find out the soil sample, to find out what kind of soil do I really have. So fortunately, the Extension Agency allows you to bring your soil down here, get it tested, which I recommend everybody to do, whether you're planting your garden, your flowers, your yard, or whatever. But find out what kind of soil you have, number one. Number two, one of the things that I picked up real quickly was, do people overwater or underwater their yard? So through being involved with the master gardening, which quite frankly, when I became a master gardener, I couldn't even spell it. But I found out real quickly that you need to be very cautious about how you water your yard. And most people, either they water it too much or they don't water it enough. So I was very conscious about that. Fortunately, I have a very unique watering system in my yard that I was able to regulate my yard, which actually, since I joined the Master Gardening Program and getting more involved with turf management, that actually, Sharon, I've been able to reduce my water bill since the last 2 or 3 years by 30%.
Wow, that's a significant amount.
Yes.
That's great. And we'll talk about how we do that. But please go on about your yard maintenance, and we'll hone in on that watering.
The other part with the yard is the mowing. Very cautious about in the spring, when I first mowed the yard, I mow it low, basically to pick up all the debris from the fall, the winter time. And then from then, I raise my lawnmower to about 3.5 inches. To keep the grass long enough, especially for the heat here in Kansas. And I think that made really a big difference, especially in water management. One of the things that I wanted to do, and I picked up from Master Gardening, is that you want the roots to be deep. And unfortunately, especially in springtime, and this year has been a wonderful year as far as moisture, is that I did not have to turn on my sprinklers for the longest period of time towards the latter part of June. Actually turn on the sprinklers just because the moisture was timely. It We had a lot of moisture, and that allowed the roots of the grass to grow deeper. I've seen some neighbors, unfortunately, that overwatered, that when it did get hot, you could see where the grass was starting to wilt, and that makes a big difference. And also that kind of goes into other potential diseases and other things that can occur if you overwater your yard.
Yes. And the key part of that people don't realize is, especially so in the spring, people might not water as much, or at least you're hoping they're not watering too much. But when you water continually, and especially during the dry season, you've got that sprinkler running maybe daily, every other day, that doesn't challenge the roots. So they stay very, very shallow. And so you're watering a lot. Your roots aren't digging down into the soil. They're at that shallow level. And then when the drought hits and that hot weather comes, there's just not enough there to gather the moisture in the soil. So you want to encourage those roots to go deeper. So by not watering in the spring like you did, you allowed just the precipitation, the normal precipitation, to water the lawn. And by not watering enough, those roots are, when it gets a little bit dry, they're moving down into the soil. And then when the drought hits, there's enough root there, enough root mass to maintain that healthy lawn through the summer. And that's a critical piece. Unlike Ireland, where they don't have to worry about any of that, we really have to manage our watering here in Kansas. And so the trick is, as you mentioned, water deeply and infrequently, not a little bit of water all during the day. You're not having your irrigation system on when it's raining. You just have to really moderate that. When you've given these tips to your neighbors, what is their response? Are they a little hesitant about not continually watering their lawn?
Oh, absolutely. It is hard for people to break habits. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. We all get in this habit of doing certain things. When I inherited my house, they had their watering system set up to where it watered literally every other day. And I cut that down to twice a week whenever it was dry, and which seems to help quite a bit. The other challenge I had, Sharon, when I moved into the house, like a lot of houses today, there's a lot of construction going on. They're putting in new lines for the TVs and the radios and everything else. So I had a lot of construction in the backyard where they were digging up the yard. So I had to do a lot of replanting. So the frustration that when I got in the house, it was in May. So I had to wait basically until September to do my reseeding. And that reseeding, basically the middle of September when I started my reseeding. And come the next year, springtime, the grass had grown and it survived the winter. So obviously I did something right, accidentally or whatever. So it came out really nice. And I see a lot of people do turf. I have a neighbor that just put in turf right now. So a combination of turf and combination of the seeding. Another unique thing I found out about my yard is that I had a combination of fescue and I had Kentucky bluegrass, which is more under the shaded trees and whatever. So fortunately with the watering system, I had two different sets of times on how I watered the two different types of grass in my yard. And a lot of people will have a combination of fescue to zoysia, whatever, to Bermuda. So that can make a big difference on how you want to water your yard.
Yes, definitely. Warm season grasses are totally different. Kettle of fish, kettle of grass, so that are managed completely different. But Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue also need some special care. So you are able to treat those areas of your yard a little bit differently and keep them both healthy. Because one thing about is Kentucky bluegrass is it really needs the cooler weather. It's much more sensitive to heat than the tall fescue. Tall fescue is much more drought tolerant.
Right.
So you have to be careful if you've got Kentucky bluegrass.
Right. And a lot of, most of the neighbors or people I talk to the big question is, what do I grow underneath my tree? Because the trees are competing with the moisture, depending upon what's one of the trees that you have. But especially with the maple trees, they like the water up front.
Right, exactly. And they will compete. So one of the pieces of advice we give out at Extension is that if you really want grass under your trees, you're likely going to have to overseed, reseed every year, every other year, depending on how heavy the shade is. But one thing to think about is if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to manage that under your trees, is replace that thin turf with a ground cover or with mulch and keep the tall fescue for the sunnier areas.
Correct.
So That's one way to get around that if you don't want to try to continually grow a thick lawn under trees, because it's just going to be a constant battle trying to do that.
And even though I give it that tender, loving care, I have my challenges. For instance, I had brown patches. Uniqueness, which apparently uncommon here for the Lawrence area, but it happened this year, was that I had armyworms. One came after the other. First, I had the brown patches. I did put a chemical on it to take care of it. I'm also involved with what's called the Master Gardener's Hotline. And during one of the days I was working with the hotline, I was getting a lot of questions about armyworms. And lo and behold, within 24 hours, I even had a neighbor that came over to me and said they just was notified that they had infestation of armyworms. So from what I picked up from the hotline, I got my little bubble bath of soapy water, went out there and got to my little patch where I thought they may be. And sure enough, as soon as I put my soapy water on the area, they came out. The army came out.
Yes, and they were munching away.
They were munching away. Unfortunately, they were still small, so I was able to treat them also at the same time.
And that's the key thing when you see these brown patches. So let's go back to the first brown patches you noticed. So the brown patches of fungus,
right,
that can infect lawns here, and that actually can happen more when people are overwatering,
right,
and over fertilizing.
Yes,
that actually is one of the root causes of the brown patch. And there are limited options for homeowners. Now you can get a professional lawn company to come and treat that, but there are limited options for homeowners on their own to treat that. Generally, lawns will recover, but you really need to cut back on watering and fertilizing so that it doesn't occur. And then you said you noticed other brown patches. So now these are different brown patches. So
I started connecting the dots.
We're always getting calls about various unidentifiable brown patches in lawns.
I was wondering what was happening to my yard.
Exactly. So the armyworms, we got a lot of calls about armyworms this year. And the key is to monitor your lawn and to look for the caterpillars. Just continually monitor. Soapy water is a great trick, and you want to get them when they're small, because once they get about 3/4 to an inch long, the insecticides are really not that effective. The hope is that the armyworms will move on. So if they don't damage the crown of the grass, your grass is likely to recover. It's whether or not it damages the crown of the grass.
That's good.
You talked about mowing height.
Yes.
And the fact that you keep your grass 3.5 inches tall.
Correct.
And that is a great method to protect that crown, especially during drought. Because what's happening when you're mowing a lawn is that the growth point of the grass, the apical meristem, as it's called, is down where you might think of as the base of the leaf. It's actually a very, very short, almost imperceptible stem of the grass plant. And that's where the apical meristem is, that growth point. And so the grass is continually sort of pushing up and growing, which is why you can mow, or when you have insects feeding on the grass, it will regrow and get taller. But a key thing about that mowing height, it's not only protecting that crown where that growth point is, but you also don't want to stress the grass too much. So when you're mowing, you don't want to take more than 1/3 of the length of the height of your grass, so that it doesn't stress that plant.
One of the tendencies I found out in talking to like my neighbors and neighbors, people like to either mow or not mow. They like a lawn or they don't like a lawn. Mm. Some people hate it. There's a lot of alternatives to that. If you like the exercise, if you like to mow, and you're on top of the situation, because especially during the springtime, and especially this year, you have to mow more than twice a week. Sometimes you have to. Obviously, summertime, maybe once every 7 to 10 days, once for you looking at the height of the grass. And I think that was a key element also of having a healthy yard, making sure you mow it on a timely fashion.
Right, because you don't want to cut off too much. That's the problem. People got really excited about this no-mow May that people heard about. And when you let the grass grow for so long, and you're letting that fescue get really, really tall, when you go and you finally do mow it, you're cutting off far more than 1/3 of that plant. And that's very stressful for the grass. So what ends up happening is you may damage and kill that grass plant by taking so much of that grass down, especially if you're saying, okay, I finally get to mow, and you mow it just an inch above the ground. And I've seen that happen. What you end up happening there is you end up with bare ground or weeds.
Right.
So the better thing to do if you want to support pollinators by managing your lawn is to shrink your lawn and manage it properly with proper mowing height, proper watering, proper fertilizing, so that that's healthy, and plant pollinator plants in your gardens rather than counting on these mostly non-native weeds to get taller to support pollinators.
Right.
So I really caution people against the no mow May. Maybe you can let it go a little bit longer in the spring and April, but don't let it get too tall if you want to have turf grass.
And, a little side note, and kidding aside, is that when you let the grass get really tall, you get little critters in the grass. Maybe some critters you like and maybe some critters you don't like. I did have my second year, I did have challenges with moles, which wouldn't make any difference in the cutting. But I put in traps and got rid of the moles. I've not had any challenges the last 2 years with them. But I've seen where moles, they like healthy grass.
They do. They're also after grubs.
Correct.
So, yes. And so that is also a common problem. For listeners, there are a bunch of show notes that are going to be attached to this podcast, publications on how to manage a healthy lawn, how to manage grubs, how to manage brown patch, and how to manage armyworms. So you can go to those resources and take a look for grubs. But that is a common thing to get. If you have a mole problem, they're going for the grubs. And so if you treat for grubs, in the long term, you'll
maybe, I do my application for grubs in May. So I think that has helped. Grubs can't find anything in my yard. So that's good. That's a good note.
Yeah. Fall is the great time to be managing for your lawn. So now's the time to overseed. If you have compacted soil, you're going to aerate. Maybe if you have a lot of clay, it's really compacted, you might throw some organic matter on there.
Right.
So, and you're going to fertilize in September, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm. September and also November. That's when we start introducing my nitrogen back into the grass, back to mowing. I don't bag my grass, so that allows the nitrogen to go back into the yard itself. So come September and November is when I get the nitrogen in, which will also help me come springtime and not having to water so much.
Yes. So there are 3 times at most people fertilize their lawns in Kansas. September is the most important one. And then November for a quick release nitrogen fertilizer. And then again in May, if you want to maintain a green lawn through the summer. Now that does mean you're going to have to mow, you're going to have to water in order to maintain that green lawn through the summer. You don't have to put on that nitrogen in the May if you don't want that much maintenance. And that's one way of reducing your water bills. Once again, Steve here has said he's reduced his water bills by 30% by watering deeply and infrequently, proper mowing height, and proper watering.
Right. In fact, right now I'm planning not to do any fertilizing come May next year. So we'll see what happens, but looking forward to it. And also you have the opportunity to mow clear out into October.
Right.
For those who love to mow for the exercise.
Yes, for those who love to mow. But you can find all these resources on our show notes. I want to thank Steve for joining us and telling us about his lawn and his maintenance. Apparently, he does have an enviable yard in his neighborhood. So thankfully, he's a master gardener and can give out all the advice to the neighbors so that everybody else can have what part of their yard they want in turf grass and maintain it in healthy ways. And I will just add, because we didn't quite get to it, Steve doesn't have any weeds in his yard either.
That is correct.
So you can reduce the herbicides used by maintaining a healthy lawn.
And I always carry a pocket knife in my pocket.
There you go. That's another surefire weed control right there.
I scare them.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Sharon, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you for listening to K-State Extension Douglas County's podcast. We hope you tune in again for not only more research-based information and resources you can trust, but also good conversation. Until next time.